Have you ever wished you could unlearn something? To erase an insight so powerful, so overwhelming, that it keeps you awake at night, staring blankly at the ceiling and wondering if ignorance truly might be bliss. I have. In those sleepless moments, the truth becomes painfully clear. Intelligence is often admired, praised, even worshipped, but rarely understood. It's a glittering blade with two sharp edges, capable of both illumination and suffering. I first recognized this hidden curse when my own mind began tormenting me. The more clearly I saw the world, the heavier reality felt. Simple truths turned into existential burdens, ordinary moments into profound crises. Happiness wasn't simply happiness anymore, it was a fragile state threatened by awareness of all its impermanence and futility. And the deeper I understood, the lonelier I felt, detached from friends who laughed freely, unaware of the shadows my mind constantly chased. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote something that startled me when I first read it. The more intelligent a person is, the more pain they're capable of experiencing. At first, the statement felt exaggerated. After all, intelligence is society's greatest prize. But over time, his words began echoing more loudly in my life. Moments that should have been joyful were dampened by my restless mind, endlessly probing beneath surfaces, relentlessly uncovering uncomfortable truths others seem blissfully able to ignore. This struggle isn't new. In fact, it's woven deep into our human story. Prometheus, the mythical titan who gave humanity the fire of knowledge, was condemned by the gods to eternal torment for daring to enlighten humanity. It was as if our ancient ancestors already understood what we've somehow forgotten, that knowledge doesn't always liberate, it can imprison. Intelligence can isolate you, strip you of comforting illusions, and leave you exposed, painfully aware of life's harsher realities. Ancient wisdom warned us too, Ecclesiastes states bluntly. With much wisdom comes much sorrow. I once mistook these words for mere poetic melancholy until my own experiences revealed their stark truth. Intelligence isn't simply a gift. It's an immense psychological and emotional responsibility. Each new insight demands a price, quietly accumulating until suddenly you realize the weight you're carrying is more than anyone should bear alone. But perhaps most hauntingly of all, the questions that intelligence ignites rarely have satisfying answers. Why are we here? What's the point of all our striving? These thoughts chase each other relentlessly in the mind of anyone who sees clearly. I began to envy those around me who never seemed bothered by such troubling questions, those who appeared genuinely content with simpler truths. What would it feel like, just for a moment, to switch off this restless awareness and experience life without endlessly dissecting it? It was these restless questions that drove me towards deeper understanding. If intelligence was truly both gift and curse, I needed to know why. I needed answers from someone who had grappled with this very dilemma before. That was when I turned fully toward the insights of Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher whose honesty about intelligence, suffering, and isolation shocked me with its painful accuracy, yet offered something even more valuable: clarity. But if clarity is our greatest strength, it might also be our greatest weakness. Would you still choose brilliance if you knew the real price, the hidden cost no one tells you about? As I immersed myself deeper into Schopenhauer's writings, I realized I was about to uncover truths that might forever change how I viewed the very essence of intelligence itself. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't known for optimism, he was known for brutal honesty. The more I delved into his work, the more I understood why. Schopenhauer once wrote, "The higher your intellect, the lonelier you will become. The more you understand, the further you'll detach from those who cannot." When I first encountered these words, they resonated like a painful confession, capturing precisely what I had silently endured for so long. For Schopenhauer, intelligence wasn't simply the capacity to think deeply, it was a condition of perpetual isolation. A sharper mind naturally notices flaws others overlook, inconsistencies others ignore. Simple conversations became tedious, small talk exhausting. Each interaction became another reminder of how far apart I had grown from those around me, how deeply alienating awareness could truly be. Soon solitude seemed the only escape, but solitude itself eventually became another form of punishment. But Schopenhauer's diagnosis went even deeper. He believed human consciousness was fundamentally tragic, uniquely burdened by memory and anticipation. Animals, he argued, experience the present moment instinctively, without burden or anxiety. But humans are forever trapped, tethered painfully to memories of past regrets and anxieties about the future. The smarter you become, the more vividly you foresee possible dangers, disappointments, and sorrows. Each possibility becomes another weight, each imagined outcome another potential threat that keeps you awake in anxious contemplation. As I began seeing my life reflected vividly in Schopenhauer's philosophy, his words grew even more uncomfortable. He asserted that intelligence inevitably leads to the realization that existence itself is filled with suffering and boredom, interrupted only briefly by moments of fleeting pleasure. Intelligent minds penetrate beneath life's surface pleasures and discover emptiness. Even when we achieve our deepest desires, satisfaction quickly evaporates, replaced again by craving and dissatisfaction, a cycle of longing and emptiness with no escape. I recognized this cycle immediately from my own experience. Each milestone society celebrated, a promotion, a successful project, an accomplishment, felt hollow in the aftermath. Achievements brought fleeting joy, soon overshadowed by existential questioning. Is this all there is? Society had promised fulfillment through success, but my intelligence relentlessly stripped away that illusion, revealing life's underlying futility. Yet Schopenhauer offered something more than mere pessimism. He proposed confronting this reality courageously rather than hiding from it. He insisted we must clearly recognize and accept suffering as integral to existence. His advice, though stark, felt oddly comforting. Acknowledging suffering openly might offer a kind of relief. Perhaps clarity itself, the same force driving my anxiety and despair, could also become the source of genuine strength and authenticity. Despite the grim reality Schopenhauer painted, his brutal honesty provided clarity I couldn't find elsewhere. His writings confirmed something I had secretly felt but couldn't articulate. Intelligence wasn't simply insight, it was endurance. To see deeply, to think clearly means enduring loneliness, anxiety, and the relentless weight of truths others refuse to acknowledge. Still, Schopenhauer was only the beginning of this intellectual journey. What about others who face this same struggle? Were there other minds out there who had suffered, fought, and survived this battle against overwhelming clarity? And if so, what could they teach me about enduring and perhaps even transcending the painful burden of being highly aware? Little did I know, the answers to those questions would lead me deeper into even darker insights. Stories and truths that would challenge everything I thought I understood about intelligence, suffering, and what it means to truly see clearly. Schopenhauer had opened my eyes to the hidden suffering tied to intelligence, yet I soon discovered he was far from alone in his bleak observations. As I ventured deeper into the works of other great thinkers, the disturbing truth became undeniable. Intelligence wasn't merely an intellectual advantage, it was often an emotional and psychological hazard. Take Friedrich Nietzsche. Famous for bold proclamations, it was his more subtle insight that haunted me the most. If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you. When I first read those words, I felt an immediate recognition. The deeper my thoughts penetrated reality's unsettling truths, the more vividly they returned to torment me. Nietzsche himself had struggled profoundly with isolation, set apart by a mind that pierced through illusions others comfortably accepted. He saw clearly the loneliness of standing apart from the crowd, describing it as both thrilling and terrifying, a place where brilliance illuminated truths few others could bear, truths that could easily drive one toward madness. Nietzsche's fears were echoed powerfully by Fyodor Dostoevsky. In his chilling novella Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky captured the destructive potential of an overly conscious mind with painful accuracy. He declared bluntly, "To be too conscious is an illness, a real thoroughgoing illness." Reading this felt disturbingly personal. It was as if he had plucked the words directly from my own restless nights. The protagonist, tortured by endless reflection and paralyzed by over-analysis, embodied the debilitating cost of profound awareness. Each thought, each insight became another source of anxiety, trapping him in perpetual dissatisfaction. But Dostoevsky's insights didn't end there. In Crime and Punishment, he voiced an even more unsettling belief through his character Raskolnikov. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. Those words struck like a blow, resonating deeply with my own experiences of quiet torment and overwhelming empathy. Dostoevsky wasn't merely describing fictional tragedy, he was confessing a painful truth about intelligence. Highly intelligent individuals inevitably experience life more vividly, suffer more profoundly, and bear deeper emotional wounds. Intelligence for Dostoevsky wasn't a mere mental attribute, it was a tragic condition with no easy escape. Albert Camus, the existential philosopher, provided another unsettling layer to this painful picture. In his famous essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus portrayed life itself as absurd, an endless, futile struggle where meaning remained eternally out of reach. Camus argued that intelligence forced us to confront this absurdity directly. Less aware individuals might comfortably cling to illusions of purpose or divine meaning, but the highly conscious were stripped bare, forced to stare directly into the abyss of meaninglessness. The smarter you became, the more clearly you saw life's inherent futility, a reality that could easily drive someone toward despair. Yet Camus proposed a paradoxical response: rebellion. Even as intelligence revealed absurdity and futility, he argued that choosing to rebel against despair, embracing life's meaninglessness defiantly, could offer a profound dignity. For the first time, I sensed a subtle hope hidden within my intellectual torment. Perhaps the very clarity causing my suffering could also guide me toward authentic freedom. Maybe intelligence wasn't entirely destructive. It might also hold the potential for genuine liberation, provided I was brave enough to accept its painful truths without retreating into despair. But if Camus offered faint optimism, Émile Cioran extinguished it with ruthless efficiency. Cioran, a lesser-known but devastatingly profound Romanian philosopher, described consciousness not merely as inconvenient but violently destructive. Consciousness is more than a thorn, it is the dagger in the flesh. His metaphor struck home painfully. My own heightened awareness had always felt precisely like a blade, deeply embedded, impossible to remove without cutting away some vital part of myself. Cioran further warned that highly conscious individuals endured perpetual tension and dissatisfaction. For him, intelligence wasn't a gift, it was a tragic fate. Reflecting on these philosophers, I saw clearly how each of them had grappled deeply with the hidden cost of intelligence. Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, Camus, and Cioran each suffered profoundly, not despite their intelligence, but precisely because of it. They understood firsthand the isolation, anxiety, and despair of heightened consciousness. Their insights weren't merely abstract philosophy. They reflected deep personal torment, real psychological wounds inflicted by the burden of seeing too much, too clearly. As I sat contemplating their experiences, one question lingered hauntingly in my mind. How many others had silently endured similar burdens? How many brilliant minds, driven to despair by their intelligence, had lived and died quietly beneath society's notice? To truly grasp the devastating consequences intelligence could have on real lives, I needed to look beyond philosophy, toward actual people whose brilliance had cost them everything. The stories I would discover were not famous tragedies everyone knew. Instead, they were hidden, heartbreaking narratives, profoundly disturbing examples of intelligence's darker side that would forever alter my understanding of what it truly means to be gifted. It's one thing to philosophize about intelligence's dark side, it's entirely another to witness real lives shattered by it. As I sought stories of gifted minds broken by their brilliance, I discovered hidden tragedies, shocking and deeply unsettling cases rarely discussed, but profoundly revealing about the devastating potential of high intelligence. Take William James Sidis, whose extraordinary mind should have guaranteed a remarkable life. Sidis was not simply smart, he was astonishingly brilliant, entering Harvard University at just 11 years old and becoming an immediate media sensation. Society labeled him a prodigy, eagerly celebrating his genius. Yet the pressure soon became suffocating. Sidis rejected fame, desperately craving privacy, normalcy, simplicity, anything to escape the relentless public scrutiny. But society wouldn't leave him alone. The press hounded him, mocking him cruelly as he sought quiet anonymity. Eventually, Sidis withdrew completely, taking menial jobs under assumed identities, deliberately living a life of obscure solitude. His death at 46, alone and forgotten, was quietly tragic, a painful testament to how intelligence had destroyed rather than enriched his existence. Sidis's brilliance hadn't liberated him, it had trapped him, forcing him into exile from a world incapable of understanding his struggle. Even more heartbreaking was the tragic life of Kurt Gödel. Gödel, a mathematician whose brilliance matched Einstein's own, made groundbreaking discoveries that transformed mathematics forever. Yet his brilliant mind eventually betrayed him. Paranoia consumed Gödel, convincing him that enemies were plotting his poisoning. The same intelligence that unlocked logic's deepest mysteries also produced crippling delusions, transforming his life into constant terror. In the end, Gödel's paranoia became so severe that he starved himself to death, refusing to eat anything not prepared by his hospitalized wife. The greatest logician of his time had been destroyed, not by external enemies, but by the treachery of his own genius mind. Gödel's life was a stark reminder that intelligence offers no immunity against self-destruction. It can amplify inner demons until they consume everything. Perhaps the most unsettling story was Grigori Perelman's. Perelman solved mathematics' famously elusive Poincaré conjecture, a triumph celebrated as a pinnacle of human intellect. Yet Perelman rejected every honor society thrust upon him, refusing prestigious awards and even $1 million prize. He withdrew completely from public life, preferring quiet anonymity to fame, living humbly in near poverty. When confronted by reporters seeking answers, Perelman merely dismissed them gently, stating he was simply gathering mushrooms, choosing peaceful solitude over worldly acclaim. Society called him eccentric, even irrational. But perhaps Perelman simply understood too clearly what others couldn't. Fame, recognition, success, they were hollow illusions, distractions from genuine peace. His intelligence had alienated him profoundly, compelling him toward isolation rather than applause. It wasn't madness, it was a logical response to a superficial world. These lives were haunting. Sidis, Gödel, and Perelman had each paid dearly for their brilliance. Their tragic outcomes weren't anomalies, they were vivid confirmations of intelligence's destructive potential. Each had lived trapped inside invisible prisons created by their minds, isolated not merely by choice but by inevitability. Yet reflecting on their stories, I sensed something deeper still, a hidden psychological mechanism driving these brilliant minds toward isolation, anxiety, despair, and self-destruction. If I truly wanted to understand why intelligence could become so devastating, I needed to uncover the psychological truths buried beneath these tragic lives. What I discovered would forever change how I viewed intelligence, not merely as intellectual strength, but as a complex psychological condition carrying immense hidden burdens that society had dangerously underestimated. Learning the tragic stories of Sidis, Gödel, and Perelman shook me deeply, but beneath their heartbreaking narratives lay a deeper mystery. Why does brilliance often spiral into such profound isolation, anxiety, and despair? Was it simply misfortune, or did something hidden and fundamental within intelligence itself drive these outcomes? Seeking answers, I turned from philosophy and history to modern psychology, hoping science might finally reveal the invisible threads binding genius to suffering. What I uncovered shocked me. Research into highly intelligent individuals consistently uncovered troubling psychological patterns almost universally overlooked. Psychologists studying gifted minds had long recognized a condition called existential depression, a profound sadness triggered not by personal tragedies but by confronting life's most fundamental questions. James Webb, a psychologist who devoted his career to studying the gifted, discovered that highly intelligent people are uniquely sensitive and deeply idealistic. This combination makes them unusually vulnerable to existential despair. Gifted minds don't simply see injustice, they internalize it, experiencing life's pain and absurdities far more vividly than their peers. They're haunted by difficult questions others rarely consider. Why does suffering exist? Why must life be filled with cruelty and injustice? These existential dilemmas rarely yield comforting answers, instead leaving brilliant minds drowning in relentless doubt and despair. Webb's insights resonated painfully with my personal experiences. Even as a teenager, while peers were carefree and absorbed by fleeting pleasures, I was silently tormented by deeper existential questions. Each news headline, each observed cruelty or injustice triggered profound emotional responses. I felt personally responsible, burdened by the sense I had to somehow fix a broken world. My heightened awareness, driven by intelligence, had isolated me emotionally from those around me who couldn't relate to this constant internal struggle. Understanding this finally brought clarity. The existential dread I felt wasn't a personal failure, it was directly tied to my intelligence, an invisible psychological cost no one had warned me about. But existential depression was just the beginning. Scientists identified another troubling phenomenon in gifted individuals known as the hyperbrain, hyperbody hypothesis. This theory explains that exceptionally intelligent minds possess highly reactive nervous systems, amplifying emotional and physiological responses to everyday stress. An intelligent mind never stops analyzing, questioning, and imagining possible outcomes, often vividly imagining worst-case scenarios. This perpetual cognitive activity triggers heightened physical stress responses like anxiety, insomnia, increased heart rate, and emotional exhaustion. The result is a relentless cycle of overthinking, worry, and anxiety that traps intelligent individuals in a self-perpetuating loop of stress and emotional pain. I recognized immediately how this theory played out in my daily life. Small incidents, a passing criticism from a friend, a minor mistake at work, even trivial social interactions, triggered hours of obsessive rumination. Yet my mind replayed scenarios endlessly, vividly imagining increasingly disastrous outcomes. What should have been minor setbacks became monumental crises, physically exhausting and emotionally overwhelming. Each anxiety-inducing thought sparked more stress, amplifying my body's response, escalating worry into panic. Intelligence hadn't just made me sensitive, it made me vulnerable, emotionally fragile, locked in an endless internal struggle. Social alienation was another painful psychological reality psychology had identified clearly. Gifted individuals, precisely because of their advanced cognitive abilities, often face profound isolation. Interests, vocabulary, and intellectual curiosity frequently don't match their peers. Social interactions become draining instead of energizing. Small talk feels meaningless, superficial conversations exhausting. Gradually, intelligent individuals withdraw, retreating inward to avoid repeated feelings of frustration and misunderstanding. This withdrawal deepens loneliness, reinforcing a vicious cycle of isolation and social anxiety. In my own experiences, this alienation was profoundly painful. I often felt invisible, even among close friends and family, hiding my true interests and thoughts behind a mask of polite conformity. Conversations others found exciting felt unbearably shallow to me. Social gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable, events to endure rather than enjoy. Over time, the cumulative effect of repeated misunderstandings and awkward silences left me painfully isolated, disconnected even from those closest to me. Intelligence had robbed me of genuine connection, leaving only a hollow imitation of social life that further intensified my loneliness. The psychological burden didn't stop there. Psychologists highlighted perfectionism as another devastating consequence frequently seen among gifted individuals. From childhood, the highly intelligent internalize immense pressure to excel, creating impossible expectations for themselves. Every minor failure becomes catastrophic. Every achievement feels insufficient. Perfectionism breeds chronic dissatisfaction, intense self-criticism, and paralyzing fear of failure. Intelligent minds often delay decisions or opportunities, overwhelmed by their own internal standards. What should empower them instead immobilizes them, trapping them in cycles of anxiety and inaction. For me, perfectionism manifested painfully clearly. Opportunities that initially excited me quickly became overwhelming burdens, haunted by the threat of imperfection. If I couldn't guarantee flawless results, I found myself paralyzed, avoiding opportunities rather than risking failure. This fear sabotaged my progress, creating a cruel paradox where intelligence, supposedly my greatest asset, became my harshest critic, setting impossible standards I could never meet. Perfectionism wasn't simply self-sabotage, it was a psychological prison built by my own mind. Discovering these psychological mechanisms, existential depression, heightened anxiety, social alienation, and crippling perfectionism, finally illuminated the deeper truth behind intelligence's dark side. Intelligence wasn't simply mental strength, it carried immense hidden psychological burdens. Yet understanding these burdens raised an even deeper question. How exactly do these hidden psychological mechanisms manifest in ordinary daily life? To fully comprehend the destructive potential intelligence held for anyone highly aware, I needed to clearly see how these invisible burdens impacted everyday existence. Those quiet, mundane moments when intelligence silently yet relentlessly shaped lives, often without anyone noticing. The truth awaiting me there would prove more troubling yet ultimately more revealing than anything I'd uncovered so far. Understanding intelligence's psychological burdens intellectually is one thing, but seeing exactly how they shape ordinary life is entirely another. The truth I discovered, hidden in plain sight, was unsettling. Intelligence quietly influenced my daily existence in profound ways I'd rarely acknowledged, yet continuously felt. These invisible burdens weren't limited to philosophers, mathematicians, or prodigies. They silently tormented ordinary, intelligent people everywhere, subtly transforming their lives into endless battles of emotional and mental endurance. I experienced this clearly in social interaction. Conversations that others effortlessly enjoyed felt draining and alienating to me. Gatherings of friends or family, meant to be relaxing and joyful, quickly turned exhausting as I feigned interest in superficial chatter. Small talk became a form of mental torture. Jokes or topics others found hilarious often felt empty and meaningless. I found myself trapped in conversations I desperately wished to escape, silently longing to discuss something genuine, anything authentic enough to make me feel truly connected. Yet authenticity rarely surfaced. Instead, I masked my boredom and frustration behind polite laughter, secretly feeling more alone each time. This persistent social mismatch intensified isolation. Over time, it became harder to build meaningful relationships. Even close friendships felt strangely superficial, filled with conversations that rarely resonated deeply. My intellectual interests, vocabulary, and thoughts didn't align with those around me, leaving me constantly misunderstood and silently isolated. Friendships became hollow routines rather than genuine bonds, interactions to endure rather than enjoy. Intelligence, supposedly a gift, had quietly robbed me of genuine emotional connection, leaving only lonely pretense behind. Another cruel irony shaped by intelligence was analysis paralysis. Each decision became overwhelming, not from complexity but from my mind's relentless scrutiny. A career path, a simple weekend plan, or even trivial decisions, each triggered endless evaluation, vivid imagining of every possible outcome. Each choice dissected relentlessly until paralysis set in. Rather than empowering decisiveness, intelligence often immobilized me completely. I recall vividly spending an entire afternoon researching productivity apps, convinced finding the perfect one would magically resolve my anxiety. Instead, hours of obsessive research only intensified indecision, spiraling into frustration and exhaustion. No choice seemed sufficient. Each had potential flaws, drawbacks, unanswered questions. Ultimately, I chose nothing, paralyzed by my own mind's obsessive perfectionism. Yet perhaps the heaviest burden intelligence inflicted was existential dread, subtly shaping even mundane daily moments. Simple experiences could trigger intense existential questioning, transforming ordinary days into profound crises. Reading the morning news was rarely straightforward. Headlines about climate change, human suffering, or injustice became deeply personal. These weren't distant problems, they haunted me, generating intense anxiety about humanity's future, society's injustices, and life's inherent fragility. Intelligence amplified every tragedy's significance, creating emotional burdens that became increasingly difficult to bear. Modern digital life exacerbated this existential dread exponentially. Constant information streams delivered endless tragedy, injustice, and global crises directly into my awareness. Instead of remaining blissfully unaware, I obsessively consumed negative headlines, doom scrolling late into sleepless nights, unable to disconnect. Friends advised unplugging or limiting news intake, but it felt irresponsible, almost immoral, to ignore reality's harsh truths. My intelligence demanded relentless understanding, even as this relentless awareness eroded my mental health. Digital overstimulation, originally sought as intellectual enrichment, soon became overwhelming anxiety, an invisible yet crushing weight intelligence had compelled me to carry. Emotional overload was another insidious consequence intelligence quietly imposed on my daily life. Gifted minds often possess heightened empathy, a profound sensitivity toward others' pain. Each news story describing human suffering, injustice or tragedy felt immediate, personal, visceral. The pain wasn't distant, it became mine. Compassion transformed into relentless emotional torment, consuming mental energy, triggering anxiety, insomnia, depression. Intelligence didn't merely provide intellectual understanding, it forced me into painful emotional intimacy with suffering far beyond my control. Yet perhaps intelligence's cruelest irony was digital burnout. In desperation, seeking meaningful connection, I turned to online spaces, intellectual communities, insightful content, stimulating debates. But instead of comfort, the relentless stimulation quickly became exhausting. My mind never rested. Each new idea triggered new questions, new anxieties, new frustrations. Debates became heated battlegrounds rather than enlightening exchanges. Information became overwhelming noise rather than enriching insight. Digital spaces intended to relieve isolation instead reinforced it, intensifying emotional exhaustion rather than providing solace. Intelligence's insatiable curiosity had paradoxically trapped me in constant mental overload, leaving me fatigued and isolated. Recognizing these invisible burdens clearly was unsettling yet profoundly liberating. Intelligence wasn't simply abstract philosophy or isolated tragedy. It shaped everyday experiences, quietly sabotaging emotional health, social relationships, and mental peace. These burdens weren't personal failings, they were predictable psychological outcomes tied directly to heightened intelligence. But this realization also brought unexpected clarity. If intelligence had created these burdens, perhaps intelligence could also overcome them. Maybe awareness itself, the very force causing suffering, could guide toward genuine liberation. Remembering Camus' message of rebellion, I wondered if the pain intelligence inflicted could transform into meaningful struggle rather than meaningless despair. Perhaps intelligence wasn't merely a destructive curse, it might also be a powerful tool for creating profound personal meaning. As I considered this possibility deeply, a quiet sense of hope emerged, a realization that the painful clarity intelligence provided might finally illuminate a path forward.